Well, good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. We've got everybody muted, just cuts down on some of the background noise. So if you have a question, there's a couple different ways you can interact with the webinar. We use Twitter so we can answer in real time. So if you have questions, you can post them to hashtag SHS webinars, or you'll notice in the GoToMeeting dialog box, there's a place where you can actually post questions. And so if you do that, then as I get to the end of the webinar, I'll go through those questions and answer those questions. Also, we'll give you contact information, so if things come up or you think of something else after we wrap up, you can certainly give us a call, shoot us an email, and be able to walk you through that. A couple other things real quick. One, wanted to mention we'll be at the IASBO conference next week in Fort Wayne, so come by the booth, especially if you have other questions related to how to implement 1079 or any other questions related to background checks or visitor management or you name it, or just to meet us. We'd love to meet you if we haven't met you. So IASBO next week in Fort Wayne. And now let me get this dialog box out of my way so we can get rolling. So want to talk a little bit about how to implement House Enrolled Act 1079. Did want to mention real quickly, I knew I had one other thing, I couldn't remember what it was, thank goodness for a slide, that we are in the middle of creating a Safe Hiring Solutions School Advisory Board. This will be representatives of schools, administrators from throughout the state. The idea here is there's just so much going on over the last several years from a policy standpoint, a legislative standpoint. We just want to make sure that school voices are being heard. There are some things that we know need to be resolved and fixed, and I've already talked to some policymakers about things that probably need to be fixed even in 1079 going into next year. And also working with other agencies where we're getting the information from different state agencies, and just trying to have a uniform voice in that. So with that, it'll be representative of the state, and so also will help drive some of the discussions and decisions that are being made. I'm Mike McCarty. I'm the founder and CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions, also founder of Reflink, which is our automated reference checking platform, Safe Visitor, our visitor management system, and we just launched Safe Recruiter Talent Link, which is a talent acquisition company. I helped start and am president of the Indiana Background Screeners Association, so that's why I try to be actively involved in any bill related to background screening that comes up at the State House. And so over the last several years, I've worked real closely, with policymakers in trying to craft and draft these bills. Prior to that, I was a violent crime detective in Nashville, Tennessee. Changes to the current law. So there's really like 4 areas of House Enrolled Act 1079 that Governor Holcomb signed last week. What does it do to your current process? So how does it impact your pre-employment? What does it add in terms of current employees? And then it changes a couple definitions, and so we'll walk through it in kind of 4 parts. Really what it does today in terms of what you're doing today is it doesn't make a lot of changes to your pre-employment background checks. Right now you have 90 days to complete an expanded criminal history check and a DCS index check. And the reason the 90 days was put in there a couple years ago, because anybody using the fingerprint-based method, sometimes that can get backlogged and could take a long time to get those results. And so that's where the 90 days came from. Plus there was some uncertainty in how much this was going to flood Department of Child Services and impact turnaround times and whatnot. So what they did with this 1079 effective July 1 is you'll have 30 days from the date of employment to complete the expanded criminal history check. Then you will have 60 days from the date of employment to complete the DCS index check. It also kind of better clarified what's required in terms of reference checks. So it was referenced in previous statute, but it wasn't real clear or clearly defined. And so the 1079 does clearly define that you have to do reference checks on all of your new candidates for employment, and if they've been employed with another school district, you have to contact that school district. And we're going to show you a tool that we have, very inexpensive. Matter of fact, it can be used transactionally, so for a small fee can add it to the background check to where it can automate this process and do all of that for you, and we'll show you that in just a second. Probably the bulk or the meat of this new law is it now adds current employees to the requirement for ongoing background checks. So it requires an expanded criminal history check for all school employees. It requires that you do 20% per year over the next 5 years. So the idea behind this is that they did not want to, from a management perspective, that you had to get all of your employees background checked between July 1 and the end of the year. So it allows basically to do 1/5 of your current employees over the next 5 years. Does two things. One, it helps you manage it. Two, it actually puts it on a recheck matrix that might be a little easier to manage. So think in terms of if you checked all your current employees or checked all your current employees this year, then in 5 years you're going to have to do everybody again. So this kind of staggers it a little bit so that you're doing roughly 20% of your employees every year are required to have a background check, because the statute does require this to be done every 5 years. The employee is required to pay for the expanded criminal history check unless you as a school district adopt a policy to pay for it. So at the end of the day, really what it means is the onus is on the candidate or the employee to pay for the background check, but as a school you can certainly pay for it if you choose to do that. You can do that. If you are requiring the employee to pay for the background check, you can only require them to pay for one expanded criminal history check in a 5-year period, not a 5-hour period, 5-year period. And so you can request an expanded criminal history check or a DCS index check at any time if the applicant or employee is the subject of substantiated abuse or has been charged with a prohibitive crime. So on the ongoing matrix, you can only require them to pay for it once every 5 years, but you as a school district can request them more frequently if it meets these criteria, and you need to substantiate what's going on. The other piece with the current employees is it removes the requirement for the DCS index check, so it's not required for existing employees. The statute says a school may require the DCS index check, so that becomes a policy issue at your level to determine whether or not you want that as part of the package. If you do, the statute clearly defines that you cannot require the employee to pay for the DCS check. So that particular piece would have to be paid for by the school district and not the candidate. A couple additional items that were added in the statute. There's a list of prohibitive crimes that you're all familiar with. It's the Icy Code. I will mention right now, I should have done this from the start. I apologize. You don't have to write all this down as we're going through it. The slides are already available. I uploaded them from a previous webinar we did earlier in the week. You can actually go to Safe Hiring Solutions, click on Resources, scroll down, click on Webinars, and you'll see on the right-hand side you can actually download the slides, and we'll make the recorded webinar available as well, probably over the next 3 or 4 days. So when you look at those prohibitive crimes, human trafficking has now been added as one of those prohibitive crimes. And then the other piece is after July 1st, 2018, so not this July 1st, but next year, the state court administrator shall establish an electronic system for receiving felony information from all the courts. And under this list of prohibited felony crimes where you can't be employed by a school district, they will pull that anybody convicted of one of those crimes. It will be sent weekly to the Department of Education for a cross-reference against anybody that's a licensed school employee. Would also be required to notify Department of Ed of any individual if the felony has been revoked, reversed, or set aside. And so that will not start for a year after this bill becomes effective. So that's kind of the foundation of what the new law requires. Also, we'll mention you can use these slides, or we're creating some talking points just as a draft that you can take and modify, and so you can use that to communicate with your current employees, just to let them know, what the changes in the law, what the law requires, and then you can, really communicate how you're going to be implementing this process over, the next 5 years. So let me pull up a slide here. I want to show you a couple things. These are a couple tools that we have available that really help you manage the requirements in 1079. Safe Visitor, and I'll come back to this one. I first want to talk about Reflink really quickly. What Reflink is, it's an automated reference checking platform. So what it does, we've got numerous schools here in Indiana have been using this for years. You can create, we've got an education template, competency-based template. Typically my experience has been when you're doing reference checks, you're usually asking, 4 or 5 questions on a telephone. A lot of times you're not getting a lot of information, or, you're trying to interpret the data or collect the data and then, read the data and make sense of it. What we've done is created templates based on, several schools helped us create this education template. It's about 20 questions, 4 competencies. And so now it's a Likert scale model. So when the reference provides feedback, they're actually scoring the candidate from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's also anonymous in that when the candidate sends us information to the reference understands that the scoring is aggregated when it comes back, so that it doesn't come back and say Mike McCarty said X, Y, and Z. It comes back and says, as a relationship, if I'm a former supervisor, this is how former supervisors scored. And so a couple things is we have created a position for schools where you can require as many or references as you want, but it also can include former school employers, and they would have to add those as well. So in one profile they can add peers, former supervisors, former schools, whatever number of references you require. So this will be integrated within the background screening platform. So actually, once we do the initial set up your templates and your positions, there's really no work that you're going to do on your end. When a candidate initiates a background check, they would also enter all their reference information. It's going to send an invitation to their references as a text as opposed to an email, and so text not going to be caught up in spam filters. They can click on a link in a text. They can actually complete the feedback on their mobile device. So what we see is a lot of times the reference checks are being completed, sometimes in a matter of hours as opposed to even days. The other thing is we're seeing references be a lot more honest in the feedback, because they know that they can, because it's coming back in and being aggregated as opposed to being tagged to them directly. What a report looks like, and so it makes it really easy to review data. So if you've got a lot of folks during the heavy hiring season, it makes also digesting the information very quickly. So when it comes back, it's going to look just like this. It's going to score it. This is an overall score for this candidate. It's going to color code it. Anything 4.0 and above is green. Anything below 4 down to 3 is yellow. Anything below 3 in negative territory is going to be red. So I can look at this very quickly. A lot of our clients will do a self-evaluation. It can be the same set of questions or a different set of questions. And so a lot of them use the same set of questions so they can see how a candidate evaluates him or herself against how a peer or a former supervisor would evaluate them. Then you can click on this. You can open it up and say, okay, here's 4 competencies: adaptability, decision making. Here's how they scored overall on adaptability. We'll see, well, this one kind of tracked down a little bit. It's going into a mustard color. It's under 4, and so now I want to drill down and say, okay, I want to look at each question. Well, we can see here that they actually had a negative response that was aggregated under willing to undertake new and different tasks, which impacted that score. So you can see that it really allows you to capture a lot of information and also digest a lot of information. And so it really expands probably the amount of information you're going to be collecting on the candidates. Again, this was one that's offered as a transactional. So you can add the fee to the background screening package, and the candidate would pay for this up front. So you would have just a small fee to set it up initially. The other way of managing the whole process is we developed Safe Visitor about 3 years ago. We worked very closely with a couple Indiana school districts. So this was really built for schools, even though we have a lot of non-schools that use this. We probably have, I don't even want to estimate how many schools here in Indiana that have adopted this and how many are in the process of adopting. We got schools in Texas, Washington State, Illinois, lots of other parts of the country also using this. It's a security system at its base. And so the idea here is really managing visitors, volunteers, contractors, anybody that's coming to your school. Just yesterday in Northwest Indiana, person showed up to visit, scanned in, flagged them, convicted sex offender, so it blocked them and kept them out of the school. And so that's what this system is at its core. What we did over the last few months as we watched this House Enrolled Act 1079 is we built in the capability within excuse me, within Safe Visitor to also manage your current employees. And so you've got registration types, and so with a registration type you could have a level 1 volunteer, level 2 volunteer, and you could have contractor, student teacher, substitute teacher, employee, and with those you can tie them to a background check. So we can tie those to any background check. Obviously the employment are going to be tied to state required background checks, same thing with contractors, vendors. On the volunteers, you can tie them to limited criminal history, or you can do a national background check through Safe Hiring. And so each one of those registration types, you tie them to a background check, and you also tie them to a frequency of recheck. So you could define on a volunteer, if you're using limited criminal history, you're doing them annually, that what we usually do is like June 15th, we expire them every year because you're going to recheck them annually. A lot of schools that are using our level 1 national volunteer background check might set those as 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever your policy dictates. On the employment side, where this can help manage 1079, is we can set that parameter at 60 months or 5 years, and so the system manages this. So at 30 days before a background check expires, it's going to start communicating with your candidate. It's going to tell them, your employer, your volunteer, your background check is going to expire in 30 days. Here's a link to renew. They can click on a link. They can submit their renewal. So all of this is managed without somebody trying to keep up with an Excel spreadsheet and then send out emails and communicate and determine whether or not they responded and they did their background check. The system will do all of that for you. So it makes the management of 1079 a lot easier. The other piece is we already have a couple schools that currently are using Safe Vendor. We're getting ready to upload their employees. So you download a list of your current employees, and then we can sort that by hire date, and then we can divide that spreadsheet into fifths. And so we'll expire. What we do is we take your most tenured employee that possibly has never had a background check or has never had an expanded criminal history check. So we'll start with most tenured employees, and we'll expire them on the spreadsheet. Then we'll go to the next 20% that would be due next year, and we would set an expiration date, say, of January 2018. And so we go through the list. So then when we upload all of your employees into the system, they automatically will get communicated if their background check is due in 2017. January would communicate with the next batch, or whenever you want that to go out. You could tell us we don't want them to expire until May. That's completely configurable. But the idea is we can load them up in here, and you can walk away and let the system do all the notifying. The other piece is it's not just a management tool. It also raises the level of security at your school. And so as we look at this incident that happened in San Bernardino a few weeks ago, where a school employee, a teacher, going through a divorce, estranged husband, had convictions for domestic violence, weapons violations, drugs violations. The school did not have any policy of managing visitors. They did adopt one 3 days after this incident, but before they did not. And so the estranged husband showed up at the school, which is not uncommon because that's where he knew he could find her. He came into the school, said he needed to drop something off. Evidently the policy allowed that, so he went down into the classroom with a .357 Magnum, shot and killed her, shot a student standing next to her, and shot a third student who survived. And so in a system like this, you can create custom exclusion lists. So step one is really developing policies where your employees feel comfortable or confident that if they're going through a situation like this, a divorce where there's a protective order or a history of violence, if they notify you as the employer, that you're going to provide some assistance. But at the same time, you could also put that person in an excluded parties list, so as they try to enter the building, it's going to flag them as an excluded party, so they're not allowed in the building. So it keeps them out of the building. We've got a really strong group of professional security advisors that are part of the Safe Visitor Advisory Board. We've got Paul Dvorak, who leads the Secret Service office out of Indianapolis. He was also on President Bush's security detail. We've got a former Navy SEAL and cyber intelligence expert. We've got Dottie Davis, Fort Wayne Community Schools, Director of Security, former law enforcement. Pete Just, CIO of Wayne Township Community Schools. We've got Mike Greenwald with CSC Securities, a software engineer. So we've brought together a really strong group of professionals that really understand security. And one of the things, especially with Paul coming in from the Secret Service, understanding that you've got to set a perimeter to keep people safe. His role in protecting, dignitaries, presidents, vice presidents, is you've got to set that perimeter wide enough that people can't penetrate it, or if they do penetrate, you've got an opportunity to do something. And so we're using a lot of that expertise here in trying to build out the Safe Visitor system to ensure that those clients that use it can create those safe perimeters at school. So it manages, three kinds of visitors. You get temporary visitor, and we would define a temporary visitor as very low risk, low frequency visitor. Typically in most school settings, this is a visitor that's showing up primarily at administration buildings. This is Mike McCarty showing up for a meeting at the admin building. And so most of your other visitors, your volunteers, vendors, contractors, are all managed with higher level background checks. So on the temporary visitor, what it does is when they show up, it actually scans the 2D barcode on the back of their license. This is exactly what the system looks like. Scans the 2D barcode, and then it can run a national sex offender registry check like it did yesterday and flag the person and didn't allow them in. It also runs against your excluded parties list. And so that is how we would handle the temporary. Here in the middle, you have a safe visitor ID badge check-in. So now your volunteer or vendor, student teacher, whatever you classify them as a registration type, they show up. And when they show up, they would have already gone through a background check that you have, dictated that they need for that position. You have a public access link, just like right here. We create the registration type. So on this demo company, we've got employee background check, teacher cadet, vendor volunteer. They select what they are. So if I select I'm a volunteer, then you can have a visitor agreement. So this language, you can have it say whatever you want it to say. Per registration type, it can be the same across all of them or it can be different for each one of them. You have the ability to also link them to information. So we've got one school here in the metropolitan Indianapolis area. We uploaded, or actually we created a link to their anti-bullying video. So now they click on this link, they view the anti-bullying video, they come back, they check that they viewed it, and then they move on through the process. And so they're signing electronically for the background check, they're entering their information. If you require this registration type to pay for their own background check, we can turn on a merchant account. It's pushed over to Safe Hiring Solutions at this point, runs the background check, comes back into the Safe Visitor system. It can automatically approve them if the background check has no criminal history, and then you're only dealing with those that have any kind of adverse or negative information. The other pieces of the system is you've got visitor logs, so now it shows everything, every person that's ever entered your facility. It's time stamped. You can come in here and search by building, you can search by attendant, you can search by date ranges, or you can search globally by a name. And so have complete logs of any visitors. Under registrations, this is where those that are getting a higher level background check, they're going to come in. If it's integrated, it's going to show a clock. If there's any negative information, it's going to show a red triangle. You can actually open this up and view the background screening report right here. Then you can take some kind of action. You can approve them, deny them, or you can deny them and add them to the exclusion list. And so it's got all your pending, it's got your approved volunteers, it's got your denied, expired. So you got list of all the different folks that have applied at your school district. You create your exclusion list like I mentioned earlier. You can add exclusions. You can do that at a building level, or you can do it across all of your schools. We keep a denied entry log. Anybody is denied access. There's some communication tools built into the system. So if you deny somebody and hit a deny button, it's going to send a text and an email to whomever you got configured to receive that information. At the building level, you'll have one or two contacts set up. You can set folks up globally, like your school resource officer or administrators. You also have an emergency button. This one, exactly what it means. Something happens, you need assistance immediately. Instead of trying to pick up the phone, dial, call, you click this button. That preset communications list receives an emergency text and an email. We have some schools that have integrated this with E911 so that it immediately sends a 911 request. The other piece that I think I forgot to mention at the front end is you also have the ability with another public access link for all of your visitors to pre-register. And so they can click on this link, they can enter their information and submit this. The great thing about that tool is if I'm running Safe Visitor at the front office of a building, when I come in each morning, this tab right here, the visitors arriving soon, is going to be the first place I look. Because I'm going to open this because what I want to see is who's coming in today. I'm looking first to see if there's a green check mark, because if there's not and it's a red X, that means they potentially failed the background check, which means could be a sex offender or excluded parties. If everything's fine, then when Sammy shows up and hits the buzzer I allow Sam into the building, all I have to do is click this up arrow, it logs him into the building, and now everybody that's entered into your buildings will show on this dashboard, so you'll constantly know who's in your building. The visitors nearby, this is for those schools that are using our Geofence, which means your volunteers, could be employees, substitute teachers, anybody that's been credentialed through a higher level background check. Once they've been approved, they get an email and a link to download a mobile app so they can store their electronic ID, and then we can also use Geofence. And so if you're using geofencing, if they have their phone and it's been activated, as they approach your buildings, we've set up geofence perimeters around each of your buildings. As soon as they cross that geofence, it's going to automatically send their information right here. So they come up, they hit the buzzer. If they've visited before, you've captured their photograph, you're going to see their photo, you're going to see their information. So when they say, hey, I'm John Smith, you're going to see that's John Smith, and you can confirm that before you allow them into the building. So that's a really fast overview of Reflink and Safe Visitor, but they're both tools that can manage everything that's required in House Enrolled Act 1079. All right, I am going to pause for a second and see if we have any questions. All right, let's work through these questions. First question, must we contact all school districts or just the most recent? I'm not sure that, I don't have the language here in front of me, so I don't think I can clearly answer that, but I will. I will look that up. So one thing I'll mention here is if you're familiar, if you use Twitter at all, I would highly recommend, following me on Twitter, which is Mike McCarty SHS. I put out little pieces of information several times a day, and these are the kind of things that we could put out, in Twitter as answer to some of these questions as well. Yes, you can have this presentation electronically for reference. If you go to, matter of fact, let me pull it up here on the screen. Actually, I may lose my questions if I do that. If you go to safehiringsolutions.com, click on resources, you'll see a tab in the middle for webinars, and on the right-hand side where they're archived, there's a link right now to these PowerPoint slides, and we'll also make the actual presentation available up there in the next few days. Does the expanded criminal history every 5 years include the DCS each time? No, it does not. So the way the language is written today is you're only required to do the DCS check for pre-employment for those new employees. So all current employees or an employee that you hire, their recheck would not require the DCS check. Would the volunteer system include individuals that are under 18 and not with the school corporation? Some seniors under 18 need to do community service, have to be asked volunteers. You can, there's nothing that precludes running background checks on anybody under the age of 18. The challenge is the majority of criminal history information on a juvenile is sealed information, so it's not publicly accessible. So what you could do is you could set up a registration type, we could call it student under 18, for quick thinking here, and a lot of times what we do is recommend high quality reference checks on individuals under the age of 18 if you're doing a background check, because so little of the information would actually show. If we currently use Safe visitor will safe hiring provide instructions on how to upload. Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're currently using Safe Visitor, if you just coordinate with us, what we can do is get your list of current employees, and we can actually manage, putting that into the system and do that for you. Not a problem. Yes, can you share pricing info on Reflink? Yeah, absolutely. I believe that the transactional price was set at $3.95 a candidate. And I will check on the language and see if the language is clear on whether it is just the most recent prior school or all of them. The beauty with Reflink is there's no extra fees. You could require 10 references or 1, and there's no additional fee. So to manage that, you could have them enter any and all former school districts, even not here just in Indiana, and would not cost you any more money, and you would still be able to access all that data. All right, went to the website, not sure where the PowerPoint's at. Good question. So what I'm going to do here is, that was the last question, so in case I lose my questions, I'm going to show you where it's at. So let's go to safehiringsolutions.com, and you'll notice up here on the top where it says resources. And then if you scroll down right here, if you just click on webinars, then it's going to open this up. On the left, it's going to show all of the upcoming webinars that we have. Here are the previous. And so right here, if you click on this implementing and managing Indiana House Enrolled Act 1079, right now we have the PowerPoint slides available, so you can download these. We'll also add this webinar probably over the next couple of days, so if anybody wanted to listen to this that didn't sign up, they would be able to do that as well. That looks like, let me see here. Whoop, one more question. Does the reference check indicate who in the former district needs to provide that reference? It does not. It does not specify. It just requires you to check with that. It actually makes it also a self-disclosure on the part of your candidate. So it doesn't specify who has to be contacted. Can you repeat the information on volunteers, a parent coming in for a party, going on a field trip? Are we required to do full background checks on them? Great questions. The law is not real clear. 1079 does not address volunteers. I can tell you that this discussion came up, I know, in the summer interim committee. So my experience has been, when it starts to get discussed, you might see something in the future, but right now it does not say exactly what you have to do. It's basically you need to do at least a limited criminal history, but you're defining, what is a volunteer. Some school districts, if you come past the front door, you're going to do a background check. Others that we work with that say you're coming in to have lunch with your child, we wouldn't require you to have a background check. So some of that becomes a policy issue of how you define a volunteer. And I know, like on Grandparents' Day and some of these events, we've created Safe Visitors so you could upload them into the system. At a minimum, it's going to do a sex offender registry check when they show up. But some of this is a policy issue at your level to define. For the Safe Visitor scan, does it run expanded and DCS checks on the spot? No, none of these checks can be done on the spot for the expanded criminal history or DCS. Very quickly, DCS is a very paper-driven process, and so what we've done over the last year is continually refine it. Matter of fact, I got our team sitting just to the left of me that's been really working hard on this to even streamline it. So what we do is we capture your information electronically. Safe Visitor actually makes this process a lot cleaner, because what we can do as they go through this process on Safe Visitor is we can link to the DCS report. They fill in the fields. We actually have our developers creating some process so that you know, right now about 50% of submissions get rejected because of address history. So they're adding some logic into the program we built. But after we capture all of your candidates' information, we have to send it through a program that converts it to a PDF, and then we email it to the state. And so it's a crazy long process. The same thing with the expanded criminal history. There's, you know, components where we're searching at the county level that are not done instantly. So those higher level background checks, like for your employees, they initiate out of here. They'll stay in a pending until they come back in from safe hiring, and it either clears them out with no criminal history or flags them as having a criminal history. Not sure I understand employees that have been here for 20 years or more or before 2009. Do they need to do a background check, or are they exempt or grandfathered in? Great question. Nobody's going to be grandfathered any longer. Everybody, when the law was passed in 2009, was grandfathered in. 1079 now says everybody with the schools has to have a background check every 5 years. So starting with 20% each year. So no longer is anybody grandfathered in. All right, I believe that was the last question. Great questions. Thanks for taking time out. I know we ran over just a little bit, but you know, it's a lot of information. Whoops, one more popped in. When do we have to start that? July 1st. And so the new law takes effect this July 1. Again, we'll be up at IASBO on next Thursday. Love for you to come by the booth. Love to meet you, answer any other questions. I'm guaranteeing you, as you get off the webinar, you're probably going to think of other things you wish you would have asked. Call us. Don't be afraid to, you know, send us an email. Let me put my contact information up here. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Have a good day.